Okay, shalom everyone. I had a good discussion with Dan Cardinale, the biologist, PhD. I think he's a virologist, however you want to say it. And I was able to at least, get some of my questions out on that. So here we go. I'm going to speed it up just a little bit and see if it helps run by faster. So I'll just go ahead and see how this works.
So we are live right now, it would appear. But for everybody listening, this is my first time with this platform, so we're going to see how this works. And welcome, everybody. Welcome to Creation Myths. This is what I hope will be the first of many creation conversations with creationists. Joining me tonight is Jungle Jargon. I'm extremely appreciative that he is here. And we're going to talk about evolution. There we go. Yeah. So we are going to start with, I'll just have Jungle introduce himself, and then he'll kind of get us started, and that'll frame our discussion. And we're just going to have an open-ended discussion for about an hour. And then we'll see where it goes. And if we want to go for 90 minutes, we can. But I probably don't want to go for longer than that. We don't want to make this a super long thing. But we'll see how it goes. So the floor is yours, Jungle Jargon. Take it away.
Yeah, I'm glad to be the first one here, because I jumped at the chance to be able to speak to, a biologist, a scientist, or that's actually working and believing in evolution and promoting evolution, because this has been one of my pet peeves for many years, more like something like 50 years, that I would hear the claims of evolutionists and read it in the books, and I wouldn't ever be able to respond, and it's just like it was a one-way street thing. So what Dan is doing here today is very appreciative. I appreciate it very much, and because it's more of a dialogue instead of just being shoved evolution down our throats, like, so to speak. So I have a list of complaints that I would like to read. Actually, I got to say something by myself. I'm a former missionary kid from the Amazon jungle. That's why my name is Jungle Jargon, and I always phrase things in a different way. Where I made the school newspaper because I ran into the dining hall where we eat, and I said, "Oh, goody, it's corn on the stalk." They thought that was funny. They put it in the newspaper because it's corn on the cob, not corn on the stalk. But anyway, I do have a list of things to read that I would like to read, but I have to go off screen here so I can pull it up here. So I got it's not real long. It's just a little bit here. Okay, as I see it, it would be the lie of evolutionism, because as far as I'm concerned, evolution is not a thing, but evolutionism is a thing. So these are all the things I'm complaining about evolutionism, because I can't complain about evolution because it doesn't exist as far as I'm concerned. So the evolutionism feeds off of evil inclinations that people have. It has no basis, has no mechanism, is not science, attempts to replace God, is based on magic, is an illegitimate industry, looking for funding and stuff. It's used to slander Christians, it's unable to make a gene, and Dan might disagree. Uses semantics to delude and confuse. Did not happen on Earth because it couldn't happen on Earth. Continually alters its claim, continually makes new claims, bullies others for legitimacy as far as educational curriculum, ignores legitimate concerns, lies about the facts, hides evidence, claims change equals evolution. In other words, you change the organism in some way or another, you say that's evolution. Claims fossils prove evolution, springs from naturalism, which was never proved, springs from uniformitarianism, which was never verified, and as how we're going to know what happened in the past, or how can you be sure that everything was always the same in the past? It requires punctuated equilibrium, requires programming that's not there, does not account for anything we see, is not standing up to scrutiny, rejects basic physical laws. So then I have a verse from the Bible. It says, "The race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor the bread to the wise, nor riches to men of understanding, nor favor to men of skill, but time and chance happen to them all. That's Ecclesiastes 9:11. So this, I believe, it applies to the idea of evolution as well, because it depends on time and chance, and it has to be selected for, and if it's not, it's just not going to work. So that about wraps it up there. Let me see if I can switch this back. Okay, that's about it. Guess that's it.
Okay. Thank you. And by the way, before we go any further, I would be remiss if I didn't congratulate you on your recent retirement. So congratulations on that. I hope you're enjoying the free time. That's pretty great.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
So you weren't kidding. There were a lot of claims in there. So let me see in here. The ones that I want to focus on for our conversation, if it's okay with you, are the scientific claims rather than the theological, religious kind of side of things. I mean, having worked in the field, I would ask you to just, I don't know how you're going to take this, but I would ask you to just take my word on it. Like, take me at my word when I say that we're not, trying to overthrow Christianity or what were some of the other ones? Slander Christians, replace God. No evolutionary biologists are trying to do any of those things. The field it's very much concerned with figuring out the mechanisms and processes of evolution.
What did I do? Mess it up? Wow. Let's try this again.
And with that in mind, I think the first claim.
Yeah, he really can't speak for everybody. I mean, I know he's trying to calm our concerns about being attacked and harassed by evolutionists, but I'm sure he's not able to speak for everyone, and so I do believe that it's still going on in many ways, many cases.
But if you want to spend some time on it, is the claim that there's no mechanisms of evolution, that change isn't really evolution, that there's no processes that can actually accomplish evolutionary change. Is that a fair characterization of where you're coming from?
Yeah, I don't think that changing or a mutation or copying error is going to write programming that's not there.
So just to get the definitions out of the way, though, the literal textbook definition of evolution is that when allele frequencies in a population change, that population is evolving. That doesn't imply that it's becoming a new species or it's changing in any major way. But if the population genetics are not constant, then that population is evolving. And that's the basic, that's what evolution is at the most basic level. And I don't think that anybody can reasonably dispute that happens.
Yeah, I don't disagree that it happens, and in fact, the genome often responds to the environment, and there's epigenetics and accommodating to the environment in real time. And there are mutations, through successive generations.
Okay.
And it doesn't change what the organism is. I mean, to claim that it's evolution is to mislead and basically bait and switch.
Okay, so a couple things. First is that we're talking past each other on what the definition of evolution is. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think you're using the word in the way that typically the word macroevolution is used. We're talking large scale changes rather than changes.
Real evolution.
Okay, so evolution above some threshold of significance in terms of scale or whatever, new genes, new structures, new something. Is that fair?
Something impressive, yeah.
All right, can we get a specific, what would count? What would be impressive to you?
A new organ, new feature, or a new, basically a new personality or characteristic or whatever it is.
Oh.
A new,
Would feathers evolving from scales count? Like if you had scales and they evolved into feathers, would that count?
I saw your example of feathers evolving, from scales, and I laughed at it because I would like to see feathers being, manipulated from alligators.
I mean, it wasn't
not chickens that already have feathers. The chickens already have feathers.
Well, that's the thing they can do, though. Chickens grow feathers and scales, so they have both, and we can
Yeah, well, that's
make the
pretty
scales
tricky.
grow into
You don't
feathers.
see that as tricky, as deceptive? You don't see that?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we can
Well,
look at their development, and they develop placoid scales, and then they turn into feathers, and we can look at the
Yeah,
gene expression patterns.
but you can't do it with alligators, right?
I don't think it. I don't know if there are experiments on it with alligators, but we can observe the transition from scales to feathers happening in other species. I don't know if alligators are one of them, but like we can
Well,
observe that
you
happen.
picked a bad example because chickens have feathers, and their scales are just the kind of scales that cover their feet, whatever.
Yeah, which are identical to reptile scales. They are reptile
Yeah,
scales.
right. But the chickens have feathers already.
So is the objection that it doesn't involve new genes then?
The chicken has feathers. It has the ability to make feathers already. Now, if you did that with an alligator that doesn't have the ability to make feathers, then you're saying something.
What if
And it's still an alligator with feathers anyway, which is
okay, so we're preemptively okay. So even if I was to show you an alligator with feathers, that wouldn't count because it's still an alligator, it just has feathers.
I'm just saying it'd be much more impressive
All right.
to me.
What about what if lizards giving live birth instead of laying eggs? Is that impressive enough?
That happens all the time. I mean, sometimes they lay eggs, sometimes it'll come out as a snake. Sometimes the snake will come out of the egg before it's born, before the egg is laid. It's not a big deal.
No, they're lizards with placentas. They don't form eggs. They have development in utero. There's about 150 species of lizards that give live birth,
Right,
and a handful actually have placentas.
But weren't you saying the difference between egg laying and live birth?
Mhm.
Yeah. So.
Right. So, I mean, that's one of the major evolutionary transitions between the synapsids and the mammals is transitioning from an amniotic egg to live birth via placenta, in utero development.
If it's a placental reptile or whatever, then where's the egg?
It doesn't lay eggs anymore. It develops a placenta.
Okay.
That's the point.
Okay, so
Now, there are reptiles that are in the middle of the transition.
You've seen it change from laying eggs to placental?
There are populations doing that right now. In fact, there was a recent case where a lizard laid 3 eggs and then gave live birth to the 4th member of the litter. So we are seeing there are populations of lizards that actually are able to go back and forth between live birth and laying eggs.
But you said it was an egg. Well, it could go back and forth. If it goes back and forth between the placental and the egg, then that's just something it's able to do.
So this goes back to my last question then. What observation would count for you as a demonstration of evolution? Is there anything?
Well, you would agree that the offspring is still a lizard or whatever it was, right? It didn't change.
Well, that's a different question though. So is there an observation where you would go, okay, that's an evolutionary change? Is there anything we could conceivably observe?
No, not really, because we know we have a history going back to the flood, and we know everything was buried by the flood anyways in the same sediment layers. So.
Well, I don't want to. Well, we can get to flood stuff in a few minutes, but I don't want to leave the new structure stuff behind because we got a case of moving goalposts here. Okay, so I gave you basically what you're asking for, where you've got lizards that are transitioning from doing one major thing to doing a different major thing, and it's not something that happened in the past. It's something that is happening right now in the present. You can go to Australia and you could find the lizard populations where some members give live birth and some members lay eggs. Like you could go and watch this happen right now.
And it doesn't change the organism from being what it is.
Okay, directly. I'm gonna screen share real quick here. Just give me 1 second. I'm gonna pull up a thing here because I have an example for you of something that actually becomes a completely different thing, and it's something that we're observing happening right now in the present. Now, do I think you're going to accept this as valid? No, I do not. But I'm going to show it for everybody watching, all like 12 people that are here. Hi, everybody. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. What I'm going to show is an example of let me just pull it up here. An example of a type of protozoan, a rhizarian, that of a group that's a heterotroph. It goes around and it eats things. And one of the things it eats is green algae, or actually cyanobacteria in this case. And 2 species within this group have become obligate photosynthetic organisms rather than heterotrophs. And they've done this through a process called primary endosymbiosis. And this is interesting because it's something that we are actually getting to watch happen in the present, because this is not something that happened way back in the day. This is a transition that is happening right now. We can go out in the environment and look at these things and see that they are actually in the middle of this transition. So I'm going to just pull this up. This will only take a second right here. Let's see. Okay, I want to.
Do you know if the code is the same thing, the one that's outside and comparing the one that's inside, if the code is actually the same code?
It is. They are each other's closest relatives. the organelle, which is called a chromatophore, and here we go.
But would the code be the same though? Is what I'm wondering.
The genetic code?
Yeah.
Yes, I think they use a non-standard genetic code, but don't quote me on that. A lot of endosymbiotic organisms use a non-standard genetic code, but I can't tell you off the top of my head if this is an example of that. But what's going on here is you've got this thing. Actually, let me move this picture out of the way here. Just give me a second. This is a genus named Pollinella. They're adorable. Here's a member Pollinella right there. They're called amoeboid rhizarians. They're not technically amoeba, but they kind of look like amoeba, but they have these shells. And in here, we get this photosynthetic structure called a chromatophore. Now, that's derived from cyanobacteria, photosynthetic bacteria. This is a thing that the other members of this genus, they eat cyanobacteria. Now, there's a lot of things that have photosynthetic structures based on cyanobacteria. But this one is different because it has, like all plastids, it has its own DNA. And the DNA in this one is different from like the plastids that allow plants to be photosynthetic. And what's going on here is that this is a recent acquisition. And we know it's recent because the genome of the chromatophore is a lot bigger than your typical plastid genome. So this is something that didn't just occur recently. This is something we're watching happen right now.
Okay, so this is something I believe that he's extrapolating. I don't believe he actually has evidence of it turning from one thing to another. And but I didn't want to say anything because I'm not sure what the facts are in this. But I'm guessing and supposing that there are similar organisms that are not able to do it, and then this one that is able to do it, and he's saying that it changed from one to the other because of the size of the DNA, as he's saying. And I really don't know what the facts are in this case, and it would be interesting to find out. And of course, we see the thing is that he's saying that photosynthesis is a process that plants have and not usually animals. And this is an animal that's incorporating the function of photosynthesis. So that's what his claim is. And even if it is the case, I'm not really that impressed.
Right, so this is a rhizarian, a heterotrophic protist, becoming a completely new type of green algae. And we're watching this happen in real time. We can see, for example, how there are genes from the cyanobacteria that have gotten transferred into the nucleus of the rhizarian. And so we know exactly what's going on here in this transition, and it's going from being an amoeboid organism to a photosynthetic organism. And that's we're watching this happen. And I'm sure that doesn't count by your standard, but I think that's just a cool example of watching a major evolutionary change happen in real time.
Do you have an example of what it was before?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's we sure do. It's basically it's that same cell morphology, except it doesn't have the chromatophore, the photosynthetic structure, and it's a heterotroph, so it goes out and eats stuff. There are, I think, 7 members of that genus. 2 of them are photosynthetic, the other 5 are heterotrophs.
It would be more impressive if you could take one that isn't and turn it into one that is.
Mm-hmm. You know. It sure would be, and would that be even more impressive if it was an animal that was doing it?
Well, notice how he didn't say that they were able to do that or observe that, and then he moved right on to another example. That was pretty good.
Well, again, you have to be sure that the codes are the same code, because if it's a different code, it's not the same thing. If it's going by a different code, like our mitochondria, goes by a different code than what's supposedly outside of our bodies, that are
right. Mitochondria have a different, a slightly different genetic code than our nuclear code. Yep, that is true. That doesn't stop them from being derived from free living bacteria, though. We know exactly what they were derived from. It's a type of it was alpha proteobacteria. So here's going back to your question though. Here's a thing. Yeah. Can we watch this happen? Yeah. So here's animals right here, and these animals. Some of them have the endosymbiotic organism is consistent inside them, but some of them actually eat the green algae and then steal the plastids from the green algae, and they maintain them for some amount of time, but eventually they get rid of them. And so you can see that, for example, in this one right here. I'll just move this to the side here. In this one right here, the larva doesn't have it. It has to eat the algae, and then it's photosynthetic after it eats it. Other ones, like this salamander, they pass it on vertically, so they don't have to eat the algae to get the photosynthetic abilities. So yeah, to answer your question, not only do we have it happening in animals right now.
you would, in order for the code to change, that would be like changing a language which can't change because it's
Notice these are examples of animals that will eat the photosynthetic organisms and appropriate whatever it is that they do, the sugars they make or whatever, and then they're just discarded in some way or another. So it's really not an example of what is incorporated into the genome to begin with. And I was thinking about something else, so I was talking about something else.
it's not only just a language, it's what it's what the mechanism is made. It's how the mechanism is made possible. If you change the language, then I don't know how you would do that if you change to change the code from one code to another, how that process would take place. That's just and there's there is no universal code. I'm sure you're aware as far as DNA and stuff.
Yeah, there's the typical code. There's the standard genetic code, and then there's lots of variations on it. Dozens of variations on it. They're usually pretty minor. Usually it's a couple of differences around the start and stop codons. But yeah, I mean that's different. But the nice thing is, for like mitochondria, for example, and plastids, they do their own translation internally for their own genes. So they don't need us to make the proteins that they make for themselves. So they can use their alternative code in there, and then in our cells that contain these structures, we can use the standard code. And changing the assignments for codons is not something that's rare throughout the history of life. There's nothing set in stone about a specific codon has to say a specific thing. It's just that it happens to be that way going back to last universal common ancestor. But like there's nothing about that that's it's not like a universal constant or something. So you can tweak that, and that happens. That's totally fine.
But you don't see how all this is like one big organism working together,
Like like the big cell and then the plastid on the inside is like one thing.
The whole biosphere. The whole biosphere is like one big organism, working together. And, groups of people are like one big organism. And
yeah, I mean, yeah, I could see that. I tend to look at it the other way, that we're not so much a person as a population of trillions of cells that are all working together. I tend to go down in scale rather than up for that kind of thing.
Yeah. So you would think that the information's bottom up then.
I'm not sure what you mean by bottom up specifically, but I think the information comes from, the source of the information is variation in whatever organism's genome.
Because you've heard
processes that increase the size.
I'm sure you heard the term front-loaded information, right?
Mm-hmm.
Top-down instruction.
Right.
So that's what we believe is top-down. Now, if you believe it's bottom-up, then you have to start with basically no information, and you have to get some kind of information, some kind of working, cell, and then you're relying on mistakes, copying errors to write billions of bits of programming that's not there.
It's not necessarily copying errors. Mutations come in a lot of flavors. Recombination and like asymmetrical, uneven crossing over, unequal crossing over that leads to duplications. That's not a copying error. That's a cell division mistake.
Which switches back and forth, and is totally irrelevant to how you would get new information that's not there.
Yeah, notice how he's being evasive here. There is no mechanism for evolution. The only claimed mechanism is copying errors, and that's never going to get the programming, instruction, and function that isn't attainable to the supposed organism that supposedly ordered itself.
If I have one gene, I got one gene, and then through some mechanism it duplicates, which we should be able to agree that happens because we can see that happening. It duplicates, and now we have two of those same genes. Does that constitute new information?
It's a copy of the same information. That's what we are. We're all different numbers of copies of the same information. That's how you are different from me, is that we all have the same.
That's not true.
We humans, we all have the same information. It's just different numbers of copies of the same information. That's what makes us different.
That's okay. I want to push back on that because that's not true. The differences between humans are due to different alleles and other sequences. It's not copy number that's responsible. It's actual different sequences. But I want to go back to the information thing though. So if I have a gene and it duplicates, and then one copy mutates, and now it does something different, is that new information?
Like what? Different like what?
Like say you have a gene that grabs onto some organic compound, right? and there's a gene duplication, and you actually have a lot of these genes in the genome because gene duplications are pretty common. And then one of those copies experiences a mutation, and it can grab onto this new compound called nylon that humans invented. So now you've got the ability to grab on and cut nylon as part of your metabolic processes. Is that new information?
Well, the purpose of the bacteria or whatever it is to break things down into smaller units, usable energy, right? So if it figures out how to break down nylon, it's just that means that it's capable of doing what it was made to do, basically.
But it explicitly wasn't made to do that. It couldn't have been, because nylon didn't exist until the 20th century.
It was made.
Yeah, but still an element, still molecules and elements, that have to be broken down.
Okay, so I just want to review where we are so far. So getting a new gene that breaks down a new compound, that's not new information. A new form of green algae, that's not evolution.
Still a bacteria.
Animals becoming photosynthetic, reptiles growing feathers or giving live birth, developing a placenta, none of that stuff. All these things we've observed, none of that stuff counts as real evolution. Is that right?
Well, chickens aren't reptiles. I'm sorry to say.
No, because you need so much more information than that sort of thing to get where we are. There's no possible to get here from there, in limited time and distance, limited time and space where we are. Just the numbers of proteins, the numbers of the amino acids of proteins. Just there's no way to be able to get all that information, and the functions and the quality control and the codes, the passwords and codes and addresses to get things where they're going at lightning speed. This stuff has to happen at lightning speed, and if you're relying on mistakes through successive generations, that's not nearly fast enough in this limited time and distance where we are.
So here's a paper from 2017. Random sequences are an abundant source of bioactive RNAs or peptides. This basically means that if you randomly polymerize either RNA or protein, just randomly make short-ish polymers. You're not talking like long 10,000 amino acid proteins. You're talking short polymers. If you make those randomly, so the sequence is random, there's a pool of monomers and you just randomly polymerize them, and you get stuff that has like biochemical activity. Not necessarily a function, but it does something, right? In a cell, you could put these random things into cells and they do things. And most of them are not actually harmful. They tend to be very well tolerated. Does that count as new information? Are those examples of new information?
But that's not what the organism does, is what you're doing, right?
Well, let's put that aside. Do those short polymers that have biochemical activity, does that count as information?
It's got to be useful information. It's got to be a directed working mechanism that is useful.
It has to be a directed working mechanism that's useful.
Yeah, it has to be not only information, but it has to make machinery that works as intended.
So this is information or it isn't? That's the first question.
Well, in the first place, you're the one that's making it, so it's not the organism that makes it, and if it doesn't have a machinery, that it's making, then it's not useful information. I mean, which means it's not even information. If it doesn't make a directed working mechanism, it's not information.
Okay, so it's only information if it's functional. Then is that the new standard?
I mean, what's the purpose? I mean, suppose so you got a replication of some kind of protein, and the protein's not used for anything. It has no purpose, and you're trying to say that's evolution when you're the one that caused it yourself. I mean, come on, can't you get anything better than that? I mean, that's why we're not convinced. You're not bringing an argument to us.
Yeah, that's what we are. We are directed working mechanisms, many forms.
So we're adding another thing. So we're adding another thing to the list of things that is not information or is not evolution because it's not information. If we randomly make new things, that's not information.
You have to get to where we are. I mean,
it's just so amazing to me that he thinks it's something when it does nothing and it has no purpose, serves no function, and he thinks it is something just because he was able to make it synthesize a molecule or something.
Everything that we are is a directed working mechanism. And if it's not a directed working mechanism, you're just grasping at straws, basically.
So the only thing that would count, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it seems like the only thing that would count would be starting with a pool of like RNA monomers, some lipids, maybe some sugars, maybe not, and some amino acids or something. And the only way it would count is if we got people out of that pool. It seems like anything less than that just isn't going to be sufficient, because you could always say, well, it's not whatever the next thing is, right?
Well, I mean, you need all of these magical miracles to happen simultaneously in the same place and same time. Plus, you need male and female. So how do you get in male and female?
That's a great question. We can talk about that. So now we have now we're making an irreducible complexity argument, right? We're saying we need all these parts together at the same time. But and sexual reproduction is often taken as an example of that, because you need male and female, and they need to have sperm and egg match up. But that's one that we have really well documented, that you don't need specifically male and female in order to do that. All you need to start is the ability to mix and match your alleles between individuals.
But once to get here from there, you do need male, female.
Yeah, and the way you do that is so cool. The way you do that is like this. It's all about reproductive strategy. So this gets back to like the most basic, what drives evolution.
So he's going to explain something that in his mind is male and female, but really isn't male and female. It's not the male and female that we're familiar with. And he admits himself that it's not even the same thing.
Evolutionary change, and it's all about who has more kids their alleles, their genes are going to be more common in subsequent generations. So if you're in a pool, right, of organisms, and you can mate, and everybody can mate with everybody else, right? Well, it might be a good strategy to make your gametes a little bit bigger than everyone else's, because that means they have more energy and they're more likely to survive, right? So you have slightly larger reproductive cells than everybody else. Now, the counterpoint to that is that's going to impose a selective pressure on other members of the population to make smaller gametes. Because if your mate is making really big gametes, I don't need to put that much energy into it. I can make a lot of smaller gametes. It's starting to sound like sexual reproduction, like egg and sperm, because that's what it is. Now you're getting to a point where you have runaway disruptive selection for one strategy to make very few, very large gametes, and another strategy to make a lot of very small gametes. And when you start down that path, the middle becomes low fitness. There's no combination of gametes where the middle ends up winning. So you have selection within a population to be either male or female. So and that's all it takes. All it takes is a little bit of variation in gamete size, and then you're off to the races. And we could watch this happen. There are green algae that reproduce using just gametes. They don't have male and female, but they have mating types, and the gametes are the same size. But there are also related green algae that are basically the same, except they use egg and sperm, where the males make lots of small gametes, and the females make one big gamete. And it's all about the selective pressures based on the energy investment into your offspring. You wind up with this, it's called disruptive selection, where you're selecting for the extremes. And this is not like I'm just thinking stuff up. We can watch this happen. We can watch this selection happen in the lab.
So you're trying to say that you can watch a single cell multiplication turn into male and female?
They're colonial. I think the ones that I could think of are colonial, but yeah, pretty much.
So they divide their chromosomes in half, and then they recombine the DNA, and then they have an offspring.
They don't have to do meiosis. They don't have to divide their chromosomes. The dominant life stage is haploid. So they take two haploid stages, mix them together, and then they immediately reduce back to haploid from the diploid zygote is how they do it.
It was not even the same thing. He's claiming it's male and female. He's labeling it as male and female when it has not even the same thing.
It's a little bit weird. It's backwards from what we do, where the only haploid stage for us is the gametes. For these algae, the only diploid stage is the zygote, and everything else is haploid. But it's, yeah.
It doesn't sound like male and female to me, but.
I mean, the literal definition of male and female is differentiated gametes. If you do sexual reproduction, and you have two strategies, where one strategy is to make a small number of very large gametes, and the opposite strategy is to make a large number of very small gametes, then that's male and female. That's the definition. It's differentiated gametes.
Sounds like a fabricated definition to me.
I mean, That's
Point
the
is-
definition. I mean, that's what it is.
So it's still not the same thing as a eukaryote.
These are eukaryotes we're
Male,
talking about.
male, but a eukaryote male and female is not the same thing.
I mean, these
but
are
the thing
eukaryotes we're talking about. They are the same thing.
But it's not male and female like we are though.
They're not animals. There various protists do that. Yeah, they're not. There are animals that are asexual though, and there are animals that go back and forth.
So it's
There's
not
snail populations, for example.
so it's not the same thing. Now he's jumping to things that are the same thing, except that reproduce without male and female.
In New Zealand is the one I could think of, where some of the populations are asexual, some of the populations are sexual. It's within one genus. You have a bunch of different situations in terms. They may even be the same species. You have a bunch of definitions in terms of a bunch of examples where they're one or the other.
But they can still be male and female. But the thing is, that's one problem, the male and female. But the other problem, of course, is to get the information, to be something other than what it is every step of the way for every different living organism in the same place at the same time on this little globe Earth where we live, so that, it's just, not only is it infinite possibilities for us to come into existence, it's infinite possibilities for everything else to come into existence. So it's multiple infinite possibilities for every single living thing that there is, which is just,
I don't think that's the case.
in my mind, is totally absurd nonsense.
Well, I don't think that's the case.
When you talk to a kid,
Well,
he's probably going to remind you of the totally absurd nonsense that it is.
I mean, so if that's the case, then we shouldn't be able to observe what's called iterative evolution, which is where the same thing evolves over and over again. So, like, for example, birds migrate to an island. This happens, by some means, you get on an island in the ocean, you get stuck on the island. And we can see the same traits evolving in those populations over and over again. You can even have situations where birds get to an island, and they evolve within that island, then they go extinct. And then new birds get to that island, and they evolve the exact same set of traits. And if it's all random, and if it's just probabilistic, rather than selection, determining what traits are more or less fit, then you shouldn't see things like iterative evolution. You should get different traits each time you rerun that experiment. But there are islands where you've got birds, they reach it, they go extinct. New birds reach it, same traits evolve, they go extinct. And it happens repeatedly. If it was random, that shouldn't happen.
And it's interesting, too, that the little green grasshopper that turns into a locust always turns into a locust and never a cricket or a katydid, because it only has the one given genome, and it can't be anything other than what the genes that it was given and directed to be or made to be.
So I disagree, and I think I've given a bunch of examples of that, such as the live birth lizards and whatnot. But I don't think we're making any progress here. So why don't we go back a few minutes? You mentioned the flood and how all the fossils came from the flood, and everything that's living right now is derived from these survivors of the flood. Do you want to take a couple minutes and kind of explain that model, and then we can talk about that for a few minutes? Would that be all right with you?
Sure. The land animals that survived were on the ark, and all other land animals died. There was sea animals and insects and arachnids and such didn't have to be on the ark. They were able to survive outside the ark. But the air-breathing land animals with lungs and respiratory system through the nose, they had to be on the ark in order to survive if they're land animals. And of course, we're descended from the 8 people that got off the ark, or the 6 people.
Yeah, the 6 couples, right. Okay, so do we know how many animals were on the ark and how fast they would have needed to speciate to get the extant biodiversity we have today?
Yeah, they've run the numbers before. There's plenty of room on the ark, for all the animals, and then some, and plus storage, food storage, and everything else. So they've already run the numbers for that, and you can check that out.
I'm a lot less concerned about the numbers in terms of surviving on the ark, as once they got off the ark, within a relatively short window, you have to have not just all the biodiversity we see today, but also go through a bunch of extinct species as well. And I would love for someone to explain how that worked, how there was time to do that.
Yeah, I think there was plenty of time for that, and of course the animals had time to spread out. And you may not be aware, but there is creationist teaching that the Earth broke apart 100 years after the global flood, so that all the animals had plenty of time to get where they were going. Like,
wait,
say,
hang on,
South America,
that's new to me.
Australia. Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's the plate tectonic. Got it. So that's
So the broke
putting aside
apart
the problems with
100 years. Yeah,
I mean, that's
100
going to
years.
cause a lot of problems with heat and friction, and that's not really workable physically. But I'm not a geologist, so I'll leave that one where it is. But in terms of what I'm concerned with is the flood. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the flood was about 4,000 years ago. It was what 2,300 something BC? Was that? It's about 4,000 years ago.
4,400, depending on how you add it up.
All right, so let's say 2,400. Let's say 4,400. So 2,400 BC. Now you get that, right? Now by the time Egypt has a robust civilization at before the Bronze Age collapse, which was about 1,200 BC. Now, so in those 1,200 years, you got extant biodiversity.
You might be confusing. You're confusing yourself a little bit because Egypt is contemporaneous with Abraham and Israel. And
well, Egypt has lasted a long time, but we have really good records from 1,200 BC because that's around the time of the late Bronze Age collapse, where most of the Mediterranean civilizations vanished in relatively short order, but Egypt actually persisted through it. So we know that 1,200 BC is reasonable, is reliable for Egypt. Now I'm way out of my field because I don't know Egyptian history, but I've read about the Bronze Age collapse. And the problem is, at that point, you have Egyptian characters that show all kinds of cats. So you've got all kinds of felines in there. You've got various kinds of raptors, at least 4 or 5 kinds of raptors. Now, if you look at just the cats, right, there are a few dozen species of cats. I'm sure someone in the chat could tell me. I forget the number of cat species that exist now. It's like maybe a few dozen, but there are also about 140 or 150 extinct species of cats. So well, hang on. Let me just run through the numbers here, because between 2,400 BC and 1,200 BC, so you've got a span of 1,200 years, but that includes an ice age, because there has to be an ice age in there, according to creationists. So in that span of time, but shave off 100 years for an ice age, you get 1,100 years to go from one pair of felines to get nearly 200 species, of which about 150 then subsequently went extinct. Now, given a generation time of a few years for cats, that is the rate of speciation that is required and the rate of genetic diversity you have to generate for that to work is astonishing. And that problem is repeated for equids, for cetaceans, for, you could go on down the line.
I got your point. I know what you're saying. And I've thought about it myself. And I believe that that's why I mentioned the breakup of the continents 100 years after the global flood, because there are examples of animals that got separated in that breakup of the continents 100 years after the global flood. So that we have the jaguars in South America and we have the leopards in Africa, which are the same animal. So I believe that what came off the ark was different kinds of cats. So there was a tiger, there was a lion, there was a leopard, there was probably other kinds of cats. So I believe that multiple different kinds of cats came off of the ark because of the fact that 100 years after the global flood, the continents broke apart, the jaguar got separated from the leopard, and the jaguar and the leopard are the same animal. Plus, there's other examples of that, which is the aardvark and the African ant bear are the same animal. There's the honey badger and the greater grison of South America. They're the same animal. So clearly, there's the same animal that got separated from the breakup of the continents 100 years after the global flood. So that means all the animals had a chance to get where they were going before the breakup, and the people never made it to South America from Africa because they didn't start moving until after the breakup of the continents. That's why there's no A, B, or E, Y chromosome in South America.
Yeah, so notice the big look of surprise that creationists do have a model that explains perfectly all the diversity that we see. So, boom.
The C, Y chromosome made it to South America because they never went to Africa. They went east instead of to Africa. And the CY chromosome would be Cush's son Nimrod, because he had a kingdom that was a great kingdom in Mesopotamia. So they went the opposite way when they started to spread out. Instead of going west to Africa, they went east all through the Pacific, all the way to Australia, all the way to the Americas. You can find the CY chromosome.
So I think we should go back to humans in a few minutes, but putting that aside and just going back to the cat example. So typically it's taken that like arc kinds correspond roughly to families. That's the general. I don't want to call it a consensus, but that seems to be the general position of most creationist organizations. In your framing, it seems like it's closer to genus, or in some cases even species. Is that fair?
Yeah, I believe that probably the lion, the tiger, and the leopard are different animals that came off the ark. That's because of that breakup situation of the leopard separating from the jaguar in Africa and South America.
So are those things separate created kinds, or did they radiate prior to the ark?
That's a good question. I'm guessing that they were created kinds. I don't know if they speciated before the global flood and then they were just each one was brought onto the ark, or what the case was, but I'm guessing they were.
I mean, this is like that matters though for the creationist model here, because how many things were created, how, when the radiations and the speciations occurred.
Okay, does it really matter? I don't think it even matters, because if you can create things, you can create every kind there is, and with built-in diversity anyway,
We have the genetic sequences for all the extant felines, and we can compare them and we can see how they're related to each other. And if creationists don't have a consensus in terms of how that process went, then I don't see how that explanation is better than the evolutionary explanation, because the evolutionary explanation actually can describe the timelines, the processes, when and how the divergence happened. Like, we can answer those questions. And if the creation model can't, then what's the value in it in terms of an explanatory model?
Yeah, it's really not a problem because we know that everything got off the ark.
I don't know that.
4,400 years ago or whatever.
Okay, so this is my chance to say that if you want to be a scientist, you have to study history first. You have to know what known human history is. You got to study the calendars, the genealogies, the historical records, and understand that they all go back 5,000 years to the date of the birth of Noah. And all the calendars are based on that. All the historical records, civilizations, everything came from that point in time. And if you don't know that, you really have no business trying to be a scientist and disproving known human history.
And we survived the global flood. Everything else got buried in those sediment layers, and it's a huge volume of sediment layers that contains the fossils of the animals and everything that was living on Earth before the global flood.
Okay, I don't think I have anything to add, because that is just in such stark conflict with the available genetic evidence in terms of the timeframes and the relationships among these things, like two things on different continents being the same species. But that's not the case.
I don't see what the problem is. If we have each one being created what it is, you have the lion.
Yeah, well, that if they have the same species on two different continents, then you got to explain how they got there. And the creationist historical record of the breakup 100 years after the global flood does explain it very well.
Created what it is, the tiger and the leopard. Can the leopard change its spots? Is one of the quotes in the Bible.
But there needs to be evidence for that.
I mean, that's by genetics, right? It's by genetics that this leopard has spots. Can he change his spots? And the answer to the rhetorical question is no, a leopard can't change his spots, because he has written instruction, genetic information that makes him have spots.
So let's bring this back to and it's it's almost 9 o'clock. So in terms of timing, I'm like I said, this is open-ended. So I mean, I was figuring at 9 we could kind of evaluate where we are, see if we want to take questions. What do you feel like doing?
Yeah, we could take questions. I think
Let's so let's do a little bit more. We'll touch on the human stuff from the arc, and then we'll I think we could kind of put a bow on it, and then we can take questions and figure, like, if it's okay with you, wrap up around 9:30. Would that be all right?
Sure. No, I'm not. I don't have a problem with time.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I don't want to let this go forever. That's the concern. So okay, so you mentioned a few minutes ago, ARC, we've got 3 human couples, Noah's 3 sons plus their wives, that kind of all of humanity kind of repopulates from that population. Now, I'm just going to come out and say it, that is completely incompatible with human genetics, both in the time frame and the biogeography of humans and the degree of genetic diversity in humans.
Wow.
Just with a bottleneck with the size of 6 and an effective population smaller than that, because the 3 sons only have 2 parents, Noah and his wife, there just isn't the possibility to have enough genetic diversity in those people when they supposedly existed to have all the diversity that we see in humans today.
Not if you talk to Dr. Nathaniel Jensen or Jensen. But no, you have to understand that Noah and his 3 sons had a lot more stable DNA or complete DNA than what we have today.
So were our genomes, our modern genomes, smaller than theirs?
Well, we have lost function, basically. Even probably maybe even before maybe not so much before the flood, because they seem to have been very, able to live many more years, hundreds of years, and we're not able to live that long. So most of the degradation to our genome has happened after the global flood. And if you look at the timeline of people, the lifespan was cut in half by the global flood.
I mean, look, there's no evidence of that, though.
But no.
Only the biblical evidence for that. There's no evidence.
There you go. Trying to deny known history, human history. And, if you follow the evidence, look at it carefully, then you can see how it fits together very, very well.
But check this out. It was cut in half from 1,000 to 500 years by the global flood. So people born after the global flood only lived 500 years. And then in the days of Peleg, it was cut in half again from 500 to 250. And then it just kept on going down to the 100 years or less that we live today.
I have what I hope is a simple question. I don't know that it is, but where did, if we're descended from 3 couples post-ark 4,400 years ago, where did extant genetic diversity come from? Because if you have 3 unrelated females, each of their genes, each locus, maximum you've got 6 alleles right there, right? Each one of them could be heterozygous. So you've got 6 alleles right there. The sons now are a little bit more limited. Between the 3 sons, you could have a maximum of 4 alleles because they both descended from Noah and his wife. So Noah could have 2, the wife could have 2 if they're both heterozygous and have completely different alleles. That's the maximum level of allele diversity for any single locus, according to the creation model. There are plenty of human loci that have more diversity than that. So how does that work?
Looking at the reality, we can determine that, from lining up the history, and even people living today, that the Kushites, the dark-skinned Africans, are descended from Kush. The Bible even says, hold on, let me finish.
What's he saying no for? I don't get it. The dark-skinned people, according to the Bible, are the Kushites that can't change the color of their skin. And Cush is the son of Ham. And of course, Nimrod is the son of Cush. But the Kushite is one of the sons of Ham, and he is the progenitor of all the dark-skinned people in Africa, all the A and the B as well. And the C and the D never even went to Africa. But clearly, the Kushites are the dark-skinned people, as opposed to the Egyptian Mitzrayim and the Phoenician descendants of Put. So I don't know what he's objecting to, but this is clear. The Kushites are the dark-skinned people of Africa, throughout all of history, human history.
The Kush, can the Kushite change the color of his skin? That was the rhetorical question. Can a leopard change his spot? It was in the same text. So the answer to the rhetorical question is no, the Kushite can't change the color of his skin. So we have the Kushites who are dark-skinned. Then we have the Egyptians who are not really as dark or dark-skinned. And we have their Y chromosome too. And we have the Phoenicians, or the Berbers today, who are descended from Put. So the Phoenicians are descended from Put. The Egyptians are descended from Mitzrayim. I'm talking about the Y chromosome. And the Kushites are descended from Cush. And we have their Y chromosomes and each of those three sons were descended from Ham, who was one of the three sons of Noah that got off the ark. So we have combining Y DNA with known historical facts and known historical people that are even living today that we know we can test their DNA and we can know what their Y chromosome is that there's three distinct populations that are not all black. So the Egyptians aren't black and the Berbers aren't black, but the Kushites are. So right there we have the genetic diversity that you're looking for right there.
No, that didn't answer the question at all, because it's the degree of genetic diversity that was the problem I brought up. But you brought up another problem for the creation model, which is
he's gonna get into talking about Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and the distance of people in relation to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And the problem with that is very close to the Middle East, and there was a lot of trade and people going back and forth between Africa and the Semitic regions. So there is a lot of genetic diversity because of the fact of the trade that was going on even in the days of Solomon, of between Africa and the rest of the world, basically. So that is one explanation of how they got the diversity that he's talking about. So, but you cannot use diversity and claim that's genetic, hierarchy or whatever, pre-existence, or because what he's trying to get to is saying that everybody's descended from Africans, which is not the case, because they have their own Y chromosome tree and mitochondrial DNA tree, and they're single lines of DNA evidence belonging to a single tree, which the rest of the world does not belong to. The rest of the world does not belong to their Y chromosome tree of A, B, C, D, and E. The rest of the world belongs to a genetic distance tree going back all the way back to the time of the breakup of the continents and the dispersion of the people from the Mediterranean area. And you can even see on the DNA charts that everyone spreads out from the Middle East. So the out of Africa theory, which he's going to try to prove, has been totally debunked already, as far as I'm concerned. He just has to figure it out, because genetic diversity is not a measure of who came first.
that it requires the African populations of Homo sapiens to be subgroups rather than the you need those to be nested within the rest of the phylogeny, rather than for non-African groups to be nested within the African groups.
But we know who they are, though.
We know who the Kushites are, and we know who the Phoenicians lineages. If you make a phylogeny of all human lineages, what you get is the common ancestor is African. And then you have African lineages descended from that, and nested within that, you have non-African lineages. That is not controversial.
I just showed you what the Y chromosome evidence is.
No, because see, you're using an unrooted tree.
No, the Phoenicians have they all belong to the same tree of Ham.
You're using an unrooted tree to show that.
The Phoenicians have the EY chromosome.
What do you mean unrooted tree? You have the A, the B, the C and the D, and the E that belong to one tree. It's all the same tree. And if you look at the DNA evidence, you can see they are all the same tree, and nobody else branches off from that tree. It's not complicated. It's DNA evidence. It doesn't lie.
And it's E something or other. The Egyptians have an EY chromosome, and it's E something or other. And the Kushites have an EY chromosome. Now, it's only when you get into the deep, dark Africa that they assigned arbitrary Arbitrary.
I mean, it's
Where-
not arbitrary. It's we can measure it. We have the
The
genomes.
arbitrary
and we can see that
letters.
there's
They assigned the arbitrary letters of A, B, and the C is missing because I already told you that the C is Nimrod. He went east instead of west, and the D is missing. They're the Andamanese and the Andamanese Islands. They went east instead of west. So in Africa, you got the A, B, and the E. And the Kushites are E, Mitzrayim, the Egyptians are E, and the Phoenicians, Berbers are an E. So we have the evidence, we have the people, and we have their Y chromosome, the evidence.
You're kind of trying to cram human genetic evidence into the biblical model, but
and
the
you're not
problem
trying
is,
to do the same. You're not trying to do the same with A as being
no,
Adam.
because the question of where humans came from was an open question, and there were different hypotheses. The way you figure this out is by looking at the degree of genetic diversity, and where there's the most diversity, that's where humanity came from, because the radiations involve bottlenecks. They involve founder events where you lose genetic diversity.
So
I think we agree on that.
who is descended from the AY chromosome?
It doesn't matter. It's just look at the.
Who is descended from the AY chromosome? Nobody else in the world is descended from the AY chromosome. They belong to a branch on a tree, on their own tree, going back to Ham. And all the other branches of the tree are all the other descendants of Ham.
Look, if you look at if Africans are nested within, if African populations are nested within the rest of humanity, then why do they have more biodiversity?
See, here you go again. Why do they have biodiversity, and which I believe can be explained from the trade between Africa and the Middle East, which would include the Semitic populations and probably some of the Japhethite populations as well. And depending on how you define black, if you define Indians as black, they have a lot of diversity too, which would be the C and the D mixing with the Semitic populations and the Japhethite populations as well.
In terms of
their they have a lot of biodiversity because there was a lot of movement going on. But when you look at the Y chromosome,
I got to push back on you there. Because look, it's movement within Africa. If you start.
So did you ever hear of the times of Solomon where there was peace in the world, and the Queen of Sheba came from Africa to Jerusalem to visit the King of Solomon? Okay, in that time period, there was a lot of movement going on, a lot of genetic variation being built into the population.
If you start with a founder event, right? You have a big population and a little bit fragments off and goes over here. That's a founder event, right? And that founder group is going to have a limited subset of the genetic diversity from the parent group. Now, in humans right now, what you find is more genetic diversity within Africa than outside of it. So
it depends how big the family tree is.
No, it very much, that is not up for debate. There's more genetic diversity within Africa than outside of it. Now,
because
if that's
the family
case,
tree, there was a lot of replication and there's a lot of reproduction, and that made a lot of.
Doesn't matter. If it's founded by a small group, then you're going through a genetic bottleneck, and you aren't going to have the level of genetic diversity. This is like well established. That you can see this in modern things, where you lose a bunch of diversity through a bottleneck, and then you don't recover it.
What does matter is that they have their own Y chromosome. They have the A, the B, and the E in Africa. Yeah. The C and the D went the other way, never even went to Africa.
Here's what I got a whiteboard here, and I'm going to use it. So here's the deal, right?
But nobody, you don't belong to the A tree.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm
only
just using here. A, B, C, D, E, F, right? That's our initial population. Now you have a number of founder events, right? So you have an offshoot population. Now we're going to say.
What's that supposed to represent? Is that the Y chromosome?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It's arbitrary. I'm just using. It doesn't matter. It's a made up example. It's just to illustrate the point, right? So look, you've got right. So you've got A, B, C, D, E, F. Now you've got a founder population. A little subset leaves, and they have C, D, E, F, but they lost A and B because this is a small sample from that population. Now this one radiates all over the place, right? Over here we get E and F, but we lost C and D.
Except that there's no E other than in Africa. That's kind of the point I'm making.
Over here we get C and E. Over here we get C, D, and E, right? You get a subset elsewhere in the world. The place where you have the most diversity, that's where you started, and that's Africa.
I got another argument
with the creation model.
No.
No, the diversity the diversity would be in the Middle East where everybody is represented. That's where you have the diversity, and you have the other families spreading out from there, going in every different direction.
You're just making things up. I got another
I'm just
argument.
making things up. Give me a second. I'm going to find the exact thing. I'm going to show you a
Okay.
figure that
In the
proves it.
meantime,
Give me a second.
I'll tell you about the rest of the DNA evidence, and they got pie charts of the representation of the Y chromosome and the mtDNA chromosome.
Oh, let's talk about mitochondrial next.
Highly represented in the Middle East, in the Turkmenistan area. In other words, the majority of the letters of DNA, whether mitochondria or mtDNA, I mean Y chromosome, they're more concentrated in the Middle East, in the cradle of civilization area, and they each spread out from there. The A Africans went, or the E Africans basically, that they labeled A and B. The E Africans went to Africa. The R Japhethites went to Europe, and the Q Japhethites, which are the same thing as R, went east, and then you have all the other ones, the J from the Semitic populations and the Gypsy populations. They all went different ways. So it's like spokes of a wheel, where everybody's concentrated in the middle in a Mesopotamian area, just like the historical reference says. And different families went different places, including the Africans that went to African and the Africans that never went to Africa because they're descended from Kush, and the Europeans that went to Europe, and the ones that went all the way to the Americas and down through the Pacific Islands and Australia. They all spread out from a central place in the cradle of where the cradle of civilization is.
These data directly contradict that. So I'm going to start with this phylogenetic tree right here. For anyone not familiar with,
Okay, here he's going to try to equate genetic diversity with the older common ancestor.
reading phylogenetic trees, you start at the root that represents the past, and then as you go, in this example, from left to right, you're moving into the present. Now, the color coding is basically showing different lineages of humans, okay? So in red, we have African, and then you go down Middle East, Europe, Central and South Asian, East Asian,
which are different Y chromosomes. They're not A, B, C, D, or E. They're F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S. All the rest of the world.
Oceania and the Americas. Now,
which are a different family tree. It's their own family tree. The Semitic family tree is its own family tree, and the Japhethite family tree is its own family tree of the Y chromosome, paternal genetic line.
I know. I've seen that before, but
and he's got them all connected together, one as if one came from the other, which is not the case, which is the deception that they're trying to pull on you, because they all go back to Noah. Each tree goes back to Noah, not to the African tree.
Just for the viewers, I'm not assuming everyone is familiar with reading phylogenies. So what you see here is that every other group here is nested within the African clade, showing one, that Homo sapiens are monophyletic, and two, that we're all descended from African populations. And we have another bit of evidence that this figure shows right here.
And we don't have the same Y chromosome as they have.
That doesn't. There's going to be genetic variation in the Y chromosome. Let me finish. So
it doesn't belong to the same Y chromosome tree. It's a different tree. Get that into your head. They're different. It's not the African tree. It's a different tree, and they meet up with the African tree at Noah. Get that into your heads, biologists, scientists, people who deny known human history.
Tree that goes all the way back to Noah. It doesn't go to anybody in Africa.
I'm going to show you
population, the Semitic tree does not go to any Africans.
That's just false. That's just not true. And
no, that is what the fact is.
Now, one more piece of evidence in favor of
genetic distance tree. You got to look at the genetic distance tree. It goes back. They're all their own tree. The Semitic tree is their own tree. The African tree is their own tree.
Over me, so I'm going to finish, or I'm going to
the Japhethite tree is their tree. Okay, I'm finished. You can talk.
So,
but I just got to correct that because it's very, very misleading.
You have it wrong, and I'll show you right here. This figure. Oh, I zoomed in too far. Let's do 150. Here you go. This figure right here. All right, this takes a second because it's weird, but it's really useful. So here's what's going on here. On the y-axis, we have a measure of genetic diversity. It's mean haplotype heterozygosity. It doesn't matter what that means. It means genetic diversity. And then
So-
which is totally irrelevant to your family tree. Genetic diversity just means that you have a mixture of DNA from other populations. That's all it means, nothing more. That's Addis Ababa, that's Ethiopia, that's close to the Middle East. And you can't equate genetic diversity with a paternal Y chromosome. You just can't do it.
the x-axis, we have
Yeah.
difference. We have distance to AA. That's Addis Ababa, the capital of modern-day Ethiopia. Now, what we see here is you break it down by lineages by color. Okay, you've got Africa, Middle East, Europe, Central South Asia, East Asia, Oceania, and the Americas. And what you see is where you have the highest diversity, East Central Africa, lowest
you're
diversity,
assuming-
Australia and the Americas. So this
You're
shows,
assuming that constitutes heredity.
yeah, it
And
does.
It doesn't constitute heredity. No, it just constitutes more replication, more
I'm sorry.
diversity.
Do you dispute the common ancestry of all humans?
Yeah, if you look at the genetic,
Wait,
just
I'm sorry. Hang on.
tree-
Say that again. You dispute that humans
No,
share
listen,
common
listen to me,
ancestry just
Dan.
within
Listen
humans.
to me,
Is that-
Dan. What's your Y chromosome, Dan?
I don't know what my Y chromosome is.
Well, you need to know. You need to know what your Y chromosome is because that's your paternal line. It goes all the way back. It's a single family tree. Either you belong to one tree, the tree of Ham, or the tree of Shem, the Semitic tree, or the tree of Japheth, the Japhethite tree. And
For Redefined Living in the chat, the answer is yes, right here. So there you go. You got Neanderthals you could add to
Well-
that tree, and you could just keep going back. So yeah.
no, Neanderthal, the Y chromosome from Neanderthals is extinct. No one living today has it. So the Neanderthal is out of the picture. That's from another relation. We have, and that's another thing. We have Neanderthal. It's the Europeans and Asians that have the Neanderthal DNA, not the Africans.
Right,
That's
because
another,
Neanderthals
that's
didn't
another
live in Africa.
evidence. That's another evidence to support the Middle East, the Mesopotamian
I'm sorry, Neanderthals didn't live in
Cradle.
Africa though,
cradle of civilization.
ever. That's irrelevant. Neanderthals.
Yeah. Of course they didn't live in Africa. That's not the point. The point is that the people that do have Neanderthal DNA got it from one of the other wives of the sons of Noah, which is probably the Japhethite wife, who was related to Neanderthals from before the flood. So this idea that the Africans somehow produced the Neanderthals, and then they later married, is not really supported. But I gotta get the sequence of the Y chromosome of Neanderthal and compare it to modern day humans, because it happens to be extinct right now. But it does, our relationship to Neanderthals goes way back before the global flood. We probably got the DNA from one of the wives of Noah, the sons of Noah, which is probably the Japhethite wife, which is the reason why Asia has it and Europe has it, because they're the Japhethite descendants.
Didn't live in Africa. Anyway, I was responding to somebody in the chat just to show that, yeah, we can keep going backwards with this
No,
kind of
I'm
stuff.
talking about
and
the
you get same
DNA.
thing.
I'm talking
No,
about
this
the
isn't-
African DNA.
This is
The
the
Africans do not have Neanderthal DNA. It's the Europeans and Asians that have.
exactly. Yes, correct. Yep.
Okay, so
Because where did
they're not
Neanderthals
even
live?
they're not even related to the Africans, except unless you go way back.
Well, you go by common ancestry.
Right.
The intermixing is interbreeding between two species. That's different from the vertical transmission. Now, Neanderthals never lived in Africa, so you wouldn't have Neanderthal genetic markers in African populations. Those are actually some of the
No,
few
but you would
genetic
have-
markers outside of Africa that are absent from Africa.
But you would have a tree going back to the African tree, and we don't
Right,
have a
because-
tree going back to the African tree.
Because the tree is based on vertical transmission of genetic information, not interbreeding.
You know,
It's
the
parents
CY
to offspring, and we never
the
had
CY chromosome. The CY chromosome is all through the Pacific and Americas. You know that, right? That Y chromosome goes
Okay.
to the African tree. It connects back to the African tree.
yeah, because we're all descended from Africa. Yeah,
No, because Nimrod is this.
That's so bad. It's not because we're all connected to the African tree. It's because Nimrod was the son of Cush, the son of Ham, which is the paternal line, which disproves the out of Africa theory.
Son of Cush, who was the son
can you
of Ham.
explain, if we didn't all come from Africa, why there's more genetic diversity in Africa than anywhere
No,
else
see,
on
that's-
Earth?
Yeah. Going back to the diversity, which is not anything having to do with a family tree other than the mixing of the populations.
That's your mistake. You're assuming
These are the data right
that
here.
genetic diversity equates to common ancestor or the.
Well, what's the
the
alternative? Okay, what's the alternative explanation? The alternative explanation would be that African populations have a higher mutation rate and therefore a higher substitution rate. Right?
Well,
That's the alternative.
if they have a
Yeah, I wasn't able to say right on the spot that the Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, is close to the Middle East, and they did have a lot of trade going on between the people, between the Semites and Japhethites and the Africans. So that's how they got the genetic diversity, not from being descended from Africans, because we're not. We belong to a different family tree that goes all the way and connects to the Africans at the time of Noah.
higher birth rate or people reproducing when they're teenagers, yes, of course.
That's completely insufficient to get you the degree of
The
diversity
Y
you need.
chromosome, the Y chromosome doesn't lie, Dan.
I mean, that does.
The C,
All chromosomes lie. They're all lying.
He's a scientist. He doesn't know what the Y chromosome is. Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
To you.
No, the Y chromosome is DNA evidence. It doesn't lie. It's your paternal line. Now you got to take the test and find out what your paternal line is, because it'll take you back either to the Semitic tree, the Semites, or the Japhethites, or the African Hamites.
So I'm gonna say one quick thing about the Y chromosome, and then we're gonna give you the last word, and then I think that'll take us to about 9:15 or so, and then we can take questions from the chat. I'm just gonna scroll up through the chat. We can take questions as they came in, and I'll stop sharing my screen here. We don't need that. And the one thing I want to say about the Y chromosome is that you can follow backwards the Y chromosome through all living humans to a most recent common ancestor. The problem with this most recent common ancestor,
which is not the AY chromosome. The AY chromosome belongs to a tree that's A, B, C, D, and E, which connects back to everyone else at the time of Noah.
is that it existed 200,000 to 300,000 years in the past, which is obviously incompatible with the young Earth model of human history. So I'm going to give you the global flood is the last word on this. I'm going to give you the last word on this, but those are the facts about the Y chromosome.
No, the global flood is a fact. You got to understand this is our history, the only history that we have. There is no other human history. We all got off in the Mesopotamian area, and we spread out from there like spokes of a wheel, and Y chromosome and empty DNA proves it. And the family trees prove it too, because the family trees go back all the way to the root, which is Noah.
Okay. Any closing thoughts before we go to questions? And if anyone has specific questions, I have not been keeping track in the chat, but if you have a question, put it in the chat right now, and we can talk about it. Standing, if you got any questions, hit me. Jungle, any closing thoughts before we do the questions?
No, I think I'm pretty good.
All right.
I just made my closing statement pretty much.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on. That was fun. So, questions. Anybody in the chat have questions for us that I missed? What did carnivores eat after the Ark? I have no idea. Here, I can show the questions. I have no idea. I don't know. I just don't know. But that's a good question, because there weren't that many, and they needed to eat something, and it was after the fall, so they ate meat.
Okay, there was 7 of every clean animal. There was plenty to eat, and then rabbits reproduce like crazy, so there's plenty of food for the animals.
This is from Corporal Anon. Can you ask JJ where he got the idea that continental drift took place after the flood? I've never seen that presented by any leading young Earth creationist ministry. Because
there's a verse that says that in the days of Peleg, the earth was divided. And that's also when, there's a whole bunch, I could go through a whole bunch of evidence. There's a whole bunch of evidence supporting that, including ice striations in India going from south to north to support the breakup of the continent.
If I could ask a follow-up about that. So if all the continents went from one supercontinent to the continents we have now in the 100 years after the Ark, what happened to all the heat generated from that?
No, it'd be absorbed by the water. The water,
water has a known specific heat.
It insulates the heat too,
Water has a known specific heat, though, and once it absorbs a certain amount of water, a certain amount of heat, it's going to vaporize and it's going to cook the planet.
Well, the main thing is it's going to insulate the heat, which it's doing right now.
The amount of heat generated from continental drift over those distances at that speed would have been sufficient to boil the water.
Well, you don't know what
it all would have been bathed in steam.
You don't know what the conditions were, and it did happen. Maybe it did heat up, maybe it snowed, maybe that's what, I don't know. Whatever.
Okay. Let's see. Sorry, I had to scroll back up a little bit. Here we go. Can Jungle tell where Noah's sons got their Y chromosomes from?
All of our chromosomes from A to S is from Adam. We all got our chromosomes from Adam. The tree connects their common ancestor, which is Noah in the Y chromosome, and the mtDNA connects to Eve, the trees.
Like, I don't have an opinion on like biblical genetics of that nature, so I'll just let that be. We got one from Standing for Truth. Standing, thank you for watching. If Jensen rooted his tree improperly, why is he able to make testable predictions on the history of civilization, both mtDNA and Y chromosome? Thanks, and good talk last night. Yeah, last night was fun. So the reason he's able to make testable predictions is because he does it wrong, honestly. So he starts from a flawed premise of improperly calculating mitochondrial mutation rates and then goes from there. Now, that's a separate question from the rooting of the tree, where he uses a 3-node tree, and I can't, for anyone who hasn't seen this, I don't have it handy to pull it up, but he uses a tree where it's not like the one I showed you where there's a beginning and then everything branches off from there. It's called an unrooted tree, where you just have like the lines just connect to each other, but there's no directionality to it in terms of past, present. It's just roots and then descendants from, or it's nodes and then descendants from those nodes. Now, the problem is with that tree specifically, Jensen misinterprets the tree. So he, for example, says that he's got one node and then it splits and you've got 2 nodes and then stuff radiating from all of them. Now, the problem with drawing it that way is that if you draw it rooted, the node in the middle is the common ancestor of the 2 other nodes, which is incompatible with Jensen's model. So that's the first problem, is that the way he draws the tree is actually not what he describes. That's the first problem. The second problem is that he makes testable predictions, but the predictions are wrong. Like, that's the thing. Like, he makes testable predictions about speciation rates, but he assumes that speciation rates are constant over and over again. He assumes speciation rates have to be constant. And that is, I don't have the words, like, to put not too fine a point on it, I don't have the words for how unreasonable that assumption is without being rude to Jensen. It is just beyond the realm of anything plausible to say that speciation rates have historically been constant. And those are the things that are the underpinnings of Jensen's testable predictions. So yes, he makes testable predictions. Are they right? No.
Okay. Do you have predictions? Do you have your predictions of your own?
Yeah, we do actually have lots of predictions. So for example, with the mitochondrial mutation rates, we have situations where we can say, okay, we don't need to make assumptions about the past.
Are they born out is what I'm saying.
They are. So I'll give you an example. We don't need to make assumptions about the past to calculate what's called a substitution rate, the rate at which mutations accumulate over generations, because we know when humans settled specific areas, and we know what the sister group to that is. So like, for example, the Pacific island of Vanuatu was settled about 3,200 years ago. I think I have that right. The Canary Islands were settled about 2,300 years ago. Madagascar was first settled about 1,500 years ago. And we know where these things were settled from. We know what the sister groups are. So given, and this is not like assumptions of evolutionary time, this is like recorded human history now. So we can look at these events and say, okay, what are the rates based on the differences between those island populations and the sister group, like on the mainland that they came from. We can figure out the substitution rates based on that. And then we can say, okay, let's make predictions about the degree of variation in Japan, which was settled, according to history, about 32,000 years ago, or Europe, about 45,000 years ago. And when we use those directly observed substitution rates to make predictions about these other groups that we have archaeological evidence, but it's not recorded human history, we end up verifying the archaeological dates for those divergence and settlement event.
Okay, the fact remains everybody got off the ark 4,400 years ago. That's what the fact is. So everything, your calibration has to fit those facts. End of story, because it's the only history you have. There is no other human history.
So yeah, we make testable predictions, and it turns out they're correct, unlike Jensen's, which are either wrong or untested.
So it's okay for you to use history, but it's not okay for me to go by known history of the migration into Africa from the Mesopotamian region.
Do you have the arrow facing the wrong direction for that one?
No, I got the history on my side and the Y chromosome on my side.
I know what the Bible says, but that's
mtDNA too.
We just said, no, we just did mtDNA. All right, Creationist, have we ever...
No, the mtDNA is the exact same thing as the Y chromosome. It has the exact same dispersion throughout the world, and it's no different. And according to Jensen's studies, it does go back to E 6,000 years ago. So there.
Seen something become a virus that wasn't a virus before? Yeah, we sure have. There's an ongoing thing right now where it's plasmids in archaea are evolving, and we're watching this happen in real time, extracellular transmission via vesicles. And that looks a lot like a virus. We also know that a group of viruses called Gemini viruses evolved from plasmids when they stole a capsid protein from an unrelated group of viruses via horizontal chain transfer. So thank you for that question.
Okay, viruses are like It's an information system. It's a communication system. Obviously gone wrong, but because of the sin of the Adam and Eve, that bad information is what they wanted to know would happen. Adam and Eve wanted to know what bad information would do, and so the corrupting of the information is what we see today, and the corrupting of our genome and the genome of the whole world, of all the life in the world. So that's what we see there. It's just a corruption of the communication signaling system that was created.
Dapper Dino, yes, we know several examples of viruses coming from non-viruses, which I would also consider a form of macroevolution, personally. This is from Redefine Living. Thank you for being here, Redefine. What assumptions are made when you determine the timeline of the Y chromosome mutation rate? So similar to the mitochondrial rate, we don't have to make many assumptions because we can use recorded human history to calibrate our rates. So that's the key thing when we're doing most recent common ancestor calculations. We can use our recorded events and actually just count the differences and do the math that way. I'm oversimplifying, but that's approximately what we do. And that gives you a rate that's directly observed because it's within recorded human history. And then you apply that rate to other situations to see if what you expect based on that rate matches the archaeological record, for example. So the assumptions are that we can measure things. We got one for, nope, that's not a question. Here we go. What did the herbivores eat after the flood? Jungle, I think this one's for you because I don't know the answer.
The herbivores, they didn't leave the ark until they were sure it was safe outside, and they sent out birds to see, if it was okay. And it was only until after the dove came back with an olive branch in its mouth that they felt it was safe to go outside. And of course, by that time, there had been already grass and trees growing at the time. So that's what they ate.
Where's the one that I just put up? Sorry, I have to find the, here we go. Okay. Let's see. Catch an echo on your end? Hang on, I'm going to mute you for a second. Okay, yeah, I think the echo was on Jungle's end there. Sorry. I'll unmute you when you got to answer. Let's see. I think we're just about caught up here. Creation myths. Here we go. Creation myths. Does the evolutionary community agree there are 3 major haplogroups found in the world in mitochondrial DNA? I think that's right. But I'd have to look it up because I'm not actually an expert on mitochondrial haplogroups. So I'd have to look that up. But I think it's 3. But yeah, sure. I think we're all caught up. I think that's it for everybody. If everybody has any additional questions, but otherwise I think we're good. So I think that wraps this up, and it's just about 9:30. So that's pretty good timing. So
yeah, I didn't realize I had the speaker going the whole time.
Oh, I only caught the echo just at the very end there.
That's good.
So you're good. So I don't have anything else, Jungle. I want to thank you for coming on and chatting. I had a lot of fun. Anything? Trying to think. Any updates? I have Standing for Truth this year. I'm going to debate Kent Hovind on Standing's channel on Thursday evening. So that's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to that. And Jungle's channel is in the description for this. So if you haven't subscribed to Jungle, do that. And obviously I'm Creation Myth. So if you're here and you haven't subscribed, give me a sub. And I think that's it. Have a good night, everybody. Jungle, anything from you?
Just want to say welcome to the great debate community, or the creationist discussion community, and I hope you enjoy your discussions in the future.
Thank you. All right. Good night, everybody. Have a good night.
Okay, that was a pretty good discussion in my estimation. I think it was pretty good. Yeah. Okay, so let me see what we got here. Let's go ahead and stop screen here. We've got some comments. There we go. Dan's tree is rooted in quicksand. Dan uses naturalism of the gaps, and he's not skeptical of any of the controlled environments that chemists set up in the lab. Yeah. You are right about that, Tony. You are so right. History. Come on, Ron. Be better than that. We got Matt Bond. Okay. I'm out of here. Can't stand being able to refute Dan. The pseudoscience man. Can't stand not being able to refute, Dan. See, that was my frustration for 50 years of my entire life. Review of a previous conversation. Yeah, that's my conversation, that one. Happened in the past. Alright, Q. Add me as an administrator so I can post links that will destroy Dan's narrative. Yeah, sorry, I couldn't stop watching and then see who was talking here. I mean, well, I could, but I had to run through it first and then see what's going on. Got Ronan. Okay. Matt Bond should be asleep. It doesn't have to be public. Then say, Heavenly Father, please heal this in Jesus' name by the power of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Ronan doesn't know, but he agrees with whatever they tell him. Yippee. Some comedy for Dan, from Dan. Yeah. It's amazing how, good of a con artist he is, It's really impressive. Something to fill the time while I'm up so early. There you go. Yeah, probably went to sleep too. All right, anyways. All right, it's been great to do the review. Thank you for your comments and your participation. And we need to corner these people, nail them down, and, just do away with evolution, the belief of evolution entirely, because it's contrary to known historical facts, known history, known science, the Y chromosome, the mtDNA chromosome, that all matches up with known historical events, which even Dan admitted that there was a bottleneck of Egypt, which we know as the bottleneck of the worldwide famine that Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson talked about, referred to. So, let's see. Trying to nail down Dan's like nailing Jello to a tree. Yeah, he's pretty good, isn't he? I'm impressed. Impressed at how malleable and maneuverable he is. He'll jump from one thing to another, even though it's changing the subject slightly. Okay, well, thanks again for everyone's participation, and science is on our side. Truth is on our side, of course, and we just have to let people know what the facts are.